Chapter 1 of The Web of Indian Life. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Web of Indian Life by the Sister Nivedita, Margaret E. Noble. Chapter 1. The Setting of the Warp. A house of my own, in which to eat, sleep, and conduct a girls' school, and full welcome accorded at any hour, of day or night, that I might choose to invade the privacy of a group of women friends hard by. These were the conditions under which I had made my entrance into Hindu life in the city of Calcutta. I came when the great autumn feast of the Mother was past. I was there at the ending of the winter, when plague broke out in our midst, and the streets at night were thronged with seething multitudes who sang strange litanies and went half mad with religious excitement. I remained through the terrific heat, when activity became a burden, and only one's Hindu friends understood how to live. I left my home for a time when the tropical rains had begun, and in the adjoining roads the cab horses were up to their girths in water hour after hour. What a beautiful old world it was in which I spent those months. It moved slowly, to a different rhythm from anything that one had known. It was a world in which a great thought or intense emotion was held as a true achievement, distinguishing the day as no deed could. It was a world in which men in loincloths, seated on doorsills, in dusty lanes, said things about Shakespeare and Shelley that some of us would go far to hear. It was full of gravity, simplicity, and the solid and enduring reality of great character and will. From all round the neighborhood at sunset would come the sound of gongs and bells in the family chapel of each house, announcing evensong. At that same hour might the carpenter be seen censing his tools, or the schoolboy, perhaps, his inkstand and pen, as if thanking these humble creatures of the day's service. And women on their way to worship would stop wherever a glimpse of the Ganges was possible, or before a bo tree or tulsi plant, to salute it, joining their hands and bowing the head. More and more, as the spirit of Hindu culture became the music of life, did this hour and that of sunrise grow to be events of my day. One learns in India to believe in what Maeterlinck calls the great active silence, and in such moments consciousness, descending like a plummet into the deeps of personality, and leaving even thought behind, seems to come upon the unmeasured and immeasurable. The center of gravity is shifted. The scene reveals itself as what India declares it, merely the wreckage of the unseen, cast up on the shores of time and space. Nothing that happens within the activity of daylight can offer a counter-attraction to this experience. But then, as we must not forget, the Indian day is pitched in its key. Tasks are few and are to be performed with dignity and earnestness. Everything has its areola of associations. Eating and bathing, with us chiefly selfish operations, are here great sacramental acts, guarded at all points by social honor and the passion of purity. From sunrise to sunset the life of the nation moves on, and the hum of labor and the clink of tools rise up, as in some vast monastery, accompanied by the chanting of prayers and the atmosphere of recollectedness. The change itself from daylight to darkness is incredibly swift. A few fleecy clouds gather on the horizon and pass from white, maybe, to orange and even crimson. Then the sun descends, and at once we are alone with the deep purple and the tremulous stars of the Indian night. Far away in the north, hour after hour, outlines go on cutting themselves clearer against the green and opal sky, and long low cliffs grow slowly dim with shadows on the sea. The north has evening, the south night. Tropical thunderstorms are common through April and May at the day's end, and the terrible convulsion of nature that then rages for an hour or two gives a simple parallel to many experiences of violent contrast and the logical extreme in Indian art and history. This is a land where men will naturally spend the utmost that is in them. And yet, side by side with the scarlet and gold of the loom, How inimitably delicate is the blending of tints in the tapestry. It is so with Indian life. The most delicate nuance and remorseless heroism exist side by side, and are equally recognized and welcomed, as in the case of a child I knew, a child whose great-grandmother had perhaps committed suttee, who ran to his mother with the cry, "Mother, mother, save me from Auntie. She is beating me with her eyes." The foundation stone of our knowledge of a people must be an understanding of their region. For social structure depends primarily on labor, and labor is necessarily determined by place. Thus we reach the secrets of thought and ideals. As an example of this, we have only to see how the Northman, with his eyes upon the sun, carries into Christianity the great cycle of fixed feasts that belongs to Midsummer's Day and Yule, approximately steady in the solar year, while the child of the South, to whom the lunar sequence is everything, contributes Easter and Whitsuntide. The same distinction holds in the history of science, where savants are agreed that in early astronomy the sun elements were first worked out in Chaldea and the moon in India. To this day, the boys and girls at school in Calcutta know vastly more about the moon and her phases than their English teachers, whose energies in this kind have been chiefly spent in noting the changes of shadow length about an upright stick during the course of the day. Evidently, education, that process which is not merely the activity of the reading and writing mill, but all the preparedness that life brings us for all the functions that life demands of us, education is vitally determined by circumstances of place. The woman pausing in the dying light to salute the river brings us to another such instance. There is nothing occult in the passion of Hindus for the Ganges. Sheer delight in the physical coolness, the joy of the eyes, and the gratitude of the husbandman made independent of rain are sufficient basis. But when we add to this the power of personification common to Naiv's people, and the peculiar Hindu genius of idealism, the whole gamut of associations is accounted for. Indeed, it would be difficult to live long beside the Ganges and not fall under the spell of her personality. Yellow, leonine, imperious, there is in her something of the caprice, of the almost treachery of beautiful women who have swayed the wills of the world. Semiramis, Cleopatra, Mary Stuart are far from being the Hindu ideal, but the power of them all is in the great mother whom India worships. For to the simple, the Ganges is completely mother. Does she not give life and food? To the pious, she is the bestower of purity, and as each bather steps into her flood, he stoops tenderly to place a little of the water on his head, craving pardon with words of salutation for the touch of his feet. To the philosopher, she is the current of his single life, sweeping irresistibly onward to the universal. To the traveled, she tells of Benares and the mountain snows, the legends of Siva the great god, and Uma Humaviti, mother of all womanhood. Or she brings memories of the Indian Christ and his youth among the shepherds in the forest of Brindaban on her tributary Jumna. And to the student of history, she is the continuity of Aryan thought and civilization through the ages, giving unity and meaning to the lives of races and centuries as she passes through them, carrying the message of the past ever into the future, a word of immense promise, an assurance of unassailable certainty. But with all this and beyond it all, the Ganges, to her lovers, is a person. To us, who have fallen so far away from the Greek mode of seeing, this is difficult perhaps to understand. But living in a Calcutta lane, the powers of imagination revive. The moon setting becomes again Selene riding on the horse with the veiled feet. Phoebus Apollo rising out of one angle of a pediment is a convincing picture of the morning sky, and the day comes when one surprises oneself in the act of talking with earth and water as conscious living beings. One is ready now to understand the Hindu expression of love for river and home. It is a love with which the day's life throbs. Without praying, no eating. Without bathing, no praying, is the short, strict rule to which every woman at least conforms. Hence the morning bath in the river is the first great event of the day. It is still dark when little companies of women of rank begin to leave their houses on foot for the bathing stairs. These are the proud and high-bred on whom the sun has never looked, too sensitive to tolerate the glance of passers-by, and too faithful to forego the sanctifying immersion. They cut the knot of both difficulties at once in this way. Every moment of the ablution has its own invocation, and the return journey is made, carrying a brass vessel full of the sacred water, which will be used all day to sprinkle the place in which any eats or prays. Their arrival at home finds already waiting those baskets of fruits and flowers which are to be used in worship, for one of the chief acts of Hindu devotion consists in burying the feet of the adored in flowers. The feet, from their contact with all the dusty and painful ways of the world, have come to be lowliest and most despised of all parts of the body, while the head is so sacred that only a superior may touch it. To take the dust of the feet of the saints, or of an image, therefore, and put it upon one's head, is emblematic of all reverence and sense of unworthiness, and eager love will often address itself to the lotus feet of the beloved. Among my own friends, health forbade the bathing before dawn, and poverty did not allow of the visit to the river in closed palki every day. But 9:30 or 10 always found the younger women busy bringing incense and flowers and Ganges water for the mother's puja, as it is called. And then, while she performed the daily ceremonies, they proceeded to make ready the fruits and sweets, which were afterwards to be blessed and distributed. It is interesting to see the difference between a temple and a church. The former may seem absurdly small, for theoretically it is simply a covered shrine which contains one or another of certain images or symbols, before which appropriate offerings are made and prescribed rituals performed by duly appointed priests. The table is only properly called an altar in temples of the Mother. In other cases, it would be more correct, perhaps, to speak of the throne, since fruit and flowers are the only sacrifices permitted. So it is clear that the Eastern Temple corresponds to that part of the Christian Church which is known technically as the sanctuary. The worshipper is merely incidental here. He sits or kneels on the steps and pays the priest to perform for him some special office, or he reads and contemplates the image in a spirit of devotion. The church, on the other hand, includes shrine and congregation, and has more affinity to the Mohammedan mosque, which is simply a church with the nave unroofed. Temples are not very popular in Bengal, every house being supposed to have its chapel or oratory, for which the ladies care, unless the family be rich enough to maintain a chaplain. Even the services of a Brahmin in the house or neighborhood, however, will not dispense them from the offering of elaborate personal puja before the morning meal can be thought of. I can never forget a reproach leveled at myself on this point. It was my first morning in a Hindu home. I had arrived at dawn, tired and dusty after days of railway travel, and had lain down on a mat spread on the floor to sleep. Towards 8 o'clock, the thought of my tea basket brightened my despair, and I turned eagerly to open and secure its refreshment. Suddenly a little boy stood before me like a young avenging angel. His great brown eyes were full of pain and surprise, such as only a child's face ever adequately shows. He did not know much English and spoke deliberately, laying terrible emphasis on each word. "Have you said your prayers?" he said. It is a little strange during the rains to have to take an umbrella to go upstairs, but without my 2 courtyards in the middle of the house, the hot weather would have been insupportable in Calcutta. These make the Eastern home, by day, a cave of all winds that blow, and at night a tent roofed in by the starry universe itself. No one who has not experienced it can quite know what it means to return in the evening and open the door upon the sky and stars that one is leaving without. The Indian night is in itself something never to be forgotten. Vast and deep and black it seems, lighted by large soft stars that throb and gleam with an unknown brilliance, while the stillness is broken only by some night beggar who chants the name of God in the distant streets, or by the long-drawn howl of the jackals crying the quarters of the night across the open plain. Even the moonlight itself, with the palm trees whispering and throwing ink-black shadows, is not more beautiful than these solemn dark nights, when the blindness and hush of things brood over the soul with their mighty motherhood. Just as the housewives of some European university town in the Middle Ages would feel responsible for the welfare of the poor scholar, so too the whole of Hindu society, which has assimilated in its own way the functions of the university. The religious student is a common burden. Where he is, there is the university, and he must be supported by the nearest householders. For this reason, I being regarded as a student of their religion, my good neighbors were unfailing of kindness in the matter of household supplies. Perhaps the most striking instance of this lay in the fact that when I was to have a guest, I had only to say so, and friends in the vicinity would send in a meal ready cooked, or the necessary bedding, without my even knowing the names of those to whom I owed the bounty. And with this there was no question as to the course of my study or the conclusions I was reaching, no criticism either of its form. They simply accorded to the European woman the care they were accustomed to bestow on the ashen-clad ascetic, because they understood that some kind of disinterested research was her object also, and they knew so well that the management of affairs was no part of the function of the scholar. What do we not read of the depth of a culture that is translated and reapplied with such ease as this? And what do we not learn of the intellectual freedom and development of the people? Few things, even in Indian life, are so interesting as this matter of the social significance of the beggar. That distaste for property which we see in such lives as Kant's and Spinoza's resolves itself readily in the Indian climate into actual destitution. Shelter and clothing are hardly necessities here. A handful of rice and a few herbs, such as can be obtained at any door, are alone indispensable. But everything conspires to throw upon such as beg the duty of high thinking and the exchange of ideas with their supporters. Hence the beggar makes himself known by standing in the courtyard and singing some hymn or prayer. He comes always, that is to say, in the name of God. There is a whole literature of these beggars' songs, quaint and simple, full of what we in Europe call the Celtic spirit. In his lowest aspect, therefore, the Indian beggar is the conserver of the folk poetry of his country. Where his individuality is strong, however, he is much more. To the woman who serves him, he is then the religious teacher, talking with her of subjects on which she can rarely converse, and in this way carrying the highest culture far and wide. It is said that the deep familiarity of Punjabi women with Hindu philosophy is the result of the strong recrudescence of the characteristic national charity under Runjeet Singh. When we think of the memories that would linger behind such a visitor, the man whose whole face spoke knowledge, standing at the door one noon and asking alms, we come upon a trace of the feeling that paints the great god as a beggar. It is droll to find that the whole city is parceled out into wards, each of which is visited regularly upon a given day. My days were Wednesday and Sunday. In going out one of these mornings about 9, I was fortunate enough to catch the whole procession coming up the lane. Men and women they were, elderly for the most part, but hale and well, with their long staffs in the right hand, and metal or wooden bowls in the left, amongst the most cheerful human beings I ever saw. The fact of this regular division of the city puts the affair at once on the basis of a poor rate, of which we have none in India, and shows that in ways appropriate to themselves the Hindu people are as able organizers as any. It may be that in Western cities the workhouse is a necessary solution, but certainly this Indian distribution of want over the wealthier community, with its joining of the act of giving to the natural sentiment, seems a good deal less mechanical and more humane than ours. It is very amusing sometimes to see how tenacious people are of their own superstitions. I have seen an English woman made really unhappy because an Indian beggar would not accept a loaf she brought and handed to him, while he would have been very thankful for the money that it cost. The donor and her friends were in despair at what they regarded as utterly impractical. Yet to the onlooker it seemed that the obstinacy was on their own side. In England we are warned that alcohol is a constant temptation to the poor and ill-fed. It is better, therefore, to give food than money. In India, on the other hand, there is no risk whatever on this score, for not one man in 100 ever tasted liquor, and at the same time a Hindu beggar at least may not eat bread made with yeast, or baked by any but Hindus of his own or better caste. Now, the offering made in this case was of yeast-made bread, baked by a Mohammedan and handled by a Christian. To the poor man it was evident that the lady was willing to give. Why should she load her gift with impossible conditions? And for my part, I could but echo, why? Among the quaintest customs are those of the night beggars. These are the Mohammedans, but all fields are their pasture. They carry a bowl and a lamp as their insignia of office. It is common amongst these gentlemen to fix on a sum at sunset that they deem sufficient for their modest wants, and to vow that they shall know no rest until this is gathered. As the hours go on, therefore, they call aloud the balance that remains, and persons coming late home or watching by the sick are often glad to pay the trifle to gain quiet. Yet there is something weird and solemn in waking from sleep to hear the name of Allah cried beneath the stars in a kind of perpetual adoration. Like a strong tide beating through the months, rise and fall the 12 or 13 great religious festivals or pujas. Chief among them all in Bengal is the autumn Durga Puja, or festival of the cosmic energy. A later month is devoted to the thought of all that is gentle and tender in the motherhood of nature. Again, it is the Indian Minerva, Saraswati, who claims undivided attention. Those who have lived in Lancashire will remember how the aspects of streets and cottages is changed towards Seminole Sunday. Every window is decorated with cakes, and every cake bears a spirited picture of confidence of some coaching or other local scene. And everywhere, with us at Christmas time, the shops are gay with holly and mistletoe, so that there is no mistaking the time of year. Similarly in Calcutta, as each puja comes round, characteristic articles appear in the bazaars. At one time it is hand screens made of beetles' wings and peacocks' feathers, and every shop and every peddler seems to carry these beautiful fans. Through September and October, as the Durga Puja approaches, the streets resound with carols to the Mother. But the most charming of all is the farewell procession with the image. For no image may be kept more than the prescribed number of days, usually 3. Up to the evening before the feast, it is not sacred at all, and any one may touch it. Then, however, a Brahmin, who has fasted all day, meditates before the figure and, as it is said, magnetizes it. The texts he chants are claimed to be aids to the concentration of his own mind, and to have no other function. When the image has been consecrated, it becomes a sacred object, but even then it is not actually worshipped. Its position is that of a stained-glass window or an altarpiece in an Anglican church. It is a suggestion offered to devout thought and feeling. On the step before it stands a brass pitcher full of water, and the mental effort of the worshipper is directed upon this water. For even so, it is said, does the formless divine fill the universe. It would seem that the Hindu mind is very conscious of the possibility that the image may thwart his own intention and become an idol. For not only is this precaution taken in the act of adoration, but it is directed that at the end of the puja it shall be conveyed away and thrown bodily into the river. On the third evening, therefore, towards sunset, the procession forms itself, little contingents joining it from every house in the village as it passes the door, each headed by 1 or 2 men bearing the figure of the god or goddess, and followed by the children of the family and others. It is a long and winding march to the Ganges side. Arrived there, the crown is carefully removed to be kept a year for good luck, and then, stepping down into the stream, the bearers heave up their load and throw it as far as they can. We watch their black hair bobbing up and down in the current for a while, and then, often amid the tears of the children, turn back to the house from which a radiant guest has departed. There is quietness now, where for 3 days have been worship and feasting. But the tired women are glad to rest from the constant cooking, and even the babies are quickly cheered, for it shall be but a month or 2 till some new festival shall bring to them fresh stores of memory. The great decorum of Oriental life is evident when one has to come or go through a Hindu city in the evening. Doorways and windows are flanked with broad stone benches, and here, after the evening meal, sit numbers of men in earnest conversation. But any woman is safe in such a street. Not even the freedom of a word or look will be offered. As Lakshman in the great epic recognized among the jewels of Sita only her anklets, so honor demands of every man that he look no higher than the feet of the passing woman. And the behest is so faithfully observed that on the rare occasions when an Indian woman may need to undergo the ordeal, I have known her own brother to let her go unrecognized. For one need not say that women do now and then slip out on foot at nightfall, accompanied by a maid bearing a lamp, to enjoy an hour's gossip in some neighbor's house. We are all familiar with the powers of criticism of quiet women who never strayed into the great world, or saw more than the view from their own thresholds would reveal. What is true in this respect of the Western cottage is also true of the Eastern zenana. Women's penetration is everywhere the same. Her good breeding makes her everywhere the same demands. On one occasion I had the misfortune to introduce into my Indian home a European whose behavior caused me the deepest mortification. But the ladies sat on the case when she had gone, and gravely discussed it in all its bearings. Finally, it was gently dismissed with the remark, "She is not well born." On another occasion, I came in one evening at the moment of some distinguished friend's arrival. She was the impressement of her reception, the warmth of the inquiries after her health and so on, that I felt myself to be certainly an intrusion. But a quiet hand detained me when I would have slipped away. "Wait," said the mother, "till I have finished, for I haven't the least idea who she is." There were, however, certain practical difficulties in the life. It had taken some time in the first place to discover a house that could be let to an Englishwoman, and when this was done, it was still a few weeks before a Hindu caste woman could be found who would be my servant. She turned up at last, however, in the person of an old woman who called me mother, and whom I, at half her age, had to address as daughter or Ji. This aged servitor was capable enough of the wholesale floodings of the rooms which constituted house cleaning, as well of producing boiling water at stated times for the table and the bath. For some reason or other she had determined in my case to perform these acts on condition that I never entered her kitchen or touched her fire or water supply. Yet hot water was not immediately procurable, and the reason? We possessed no cooking stove. I asked the price of this necessary article and was told 6 farthings. Armed with this sum, sure enough, my trusty retainer brought home a tile, a lump of clay, and a few thin iron bars, and constructed from these, with the greatest skill, the stove we needed. It took some days to set and harden, but at last the work was complete. Afternoon tea, prepared under my own roof, was set triumphantly before me, and my ancient daughter squatted on the veranda facing me, with the hot kettle on the stone floor beside her, to see what strange thing might come to pass. I poured out a cup of tea and held out the pot to G for more water. To my amazement, she only gave a sort of grunt and disappeared into the inner courtyard. When she came back a second later, she was dripping with cold water from head to foot. Before touching what I was about to drink, she had considered a complete immersion necessary. How happy were those days in the little lane! How unlike the terrible pictures of the Hindu routine which, together with that of the Pharisees in the New Testament, had embittered my English childhood. Constant ablutions, endless prostrations, unmeaning caste restrictions, what a torture the Drury tale had been! And the reality was so different. My little study, with its modern pictures and few books, looked out on the cheeriest of neighbors. Here a brown baby with black lines under his eyes and a gold chain around his waist, carried in triumph by his mother or nurse. There some dignified woman, full of sweetness, as a glance would show, on her way to the bathing ghat. Again a quiet man with an intellectual face and oriental leisure. And above it all, the tall palm trees, with little brown villages and fresh water tanks nestling at their feet, while all kinds of birds flew about fearlessly just outside my window, and threw their shadows across my paper as I wrote. The golden glow of one's first sensations suffuses it still. It was all like a birth into a new world. One evening, as I prepared for supper, a sound of wailing broke the after-darkness quiet of the lane, and making my way in the direction of the cry, I entered the courtyard of some servant's hut just opposite. On the floor of the yard a girl lay dying, and as we sat and watched her, she breathed her last. Hours went by, and as the men were away at the burning ghat making arrangements for the funeral fire that would be over before dawn, I sat with the weeping women, longing to comfort them, yet knowing not what to say. At last the violence of their grief had exhausted them, and even the mother of the dead girl lay back in my arms in a kind of stupor, dazed into forgetfulness for a while. And, as is the way of sorrow, it all swept over her again in a flood of despair. "Oh," she cried, turning to me, "what shall I do? Where is my child now?" I have always regarded that as the moment in which I found the key, filled with a sudden pity, not so much for the bereaved woman as for those to whom the use of some particular language of the infinite is a question of morality. I leaned forward. "Hush, mother," I said. "Your child is with the Great Mother. She is with Kali." And then for a moment, with memory stilled, we were enfolded together, Eastern and Western, in the unfathomed depths of consolation of the world heart. End of Chapter 1.